Hi, I'm Pat Keegan and welcome back to the DIY Home Built channel. In this week's skill building video, I'm going to show you 3 techniques for how to square up a cabinet. Making sure that your cabinet carcasses are square and actually understanding what it means for the cabinet carcasses to be square is a pretty critical element in the cabinet construction process. And it's critical for a couple of reasons. The first reason is really aesthetics. If your cabinet carcasses aren't squared up, they're going to be crooked. And if you try to hang a crooked cabinet on a wall, it just starts to present some problems for that part of the process. And it just kind of looks bad if you can't get it level and squared out and straightened up. And same with like a bookcase, for example. If your bookcase isn't square and the carcass is crooked, getting it to rest on the ground without looking like it's leaning or something like that is going to be almost next to impossible without shoving something under one side, and you just really don't want to do that. So aesthetics is kind of a big reason. The other reason, which I partially mentioned, was making sure that your cabinets are square up front helps you with the downstream elements of the cabinet construction process. And what I mean by that is when you go to attach a back directly over the edges here of the carcass, or if you attach a face frame to these edges, if the cabinet isn't square underneath, it just becomes more work for you to try to align that face frame or the back properly. And in fact, I just have a scrap piece. This is not cut directly to fit this, but it's enough to show. Let's just say I want to set this on here, and this cabinet, by the way, this box is not square, and it's not square on purpose for the purposes of this demo or this video. But if I try to flush a back up with one of the sides, and it's not, the cabinet's not square, it's going to stick out on another side, and then it's going to be short over here and long and stick out over here, and it's going to become difficult to square up the cabinet while I'm working on it. So we put in the construction industry, I guess, we put a lot of emphasis for making the cabinet or the carcass square before we start putting on the face frames or the backs. And this point was really kind of driven home. I can give you a couple of different examples. I was actually on a Habitat for Humanity build last week, which, by the way, if you haven't done that, everybody should try that if you're interested in doing various elements of the home construction process. You will learn a lot because there's a lot of experienced people out there, and they will help you gain those skills. And so not only is it a great way, to do kind of a charitable thing with your time, which I even think is sometimes better than money. I think giving money is great if that's what you can do, and that's fine. But giving of your time is really something that's pretty meaningful to me anyway. And so, but in exchange for that, you're going to get people who, the site supervisors and the carpenters and the painters and all the other folks that work on those jobs. There's a lot of people with a lot of really good experience, and you can kind of use that as a venue to improve your skills. And during that process where we, last week, we were actually framing interior and exterior walls. And although I've done that a lot, I haven't done a lot of it lately, and so it was a good refresher for me, and I really enjoyed that. But one of the things that we did, and that you'll do when you're building interior or exterior walls, is you're going to make sure that they are square. And the reason you want to make sure they're square is for the downstream processes. For example, adding the sheathing. Every outside of the house, of a home, has some sheathing applied to it. Typically, it's an OSB or a plywood type sheathing that you're gonna nail to the wall, and it's preferably done while the wall is lying down on the. We were working on the second story, so basically on the second story platform or the deck. The walls are lying down, and you're going to attach the sheathing, and then you're going to lift the wall all at once. It's just much easier to apply the sheathing when the wall is laying on the deck than it is to put the wall up first and then try to lug these big sheets of plywood or OSB or whatever you're using, and then trying to get them attached while the wall is vertical. So. But there's another instance where before you attach the sheathing to the outside facing wall, you're going to have to square that wall up. So understanding how to do that makes it easier for you to attach the sheathing, because the sheathing itself is square. It's a 4x8, typically 4x8 sheet of something. And so it's very nice when the wall is square, you just lay the sheathing on it, and you flush up one edge and then you let it run and you can just put it in no problem. If the wall's not square, it's going to be impossible to line that stuff up. You're going to be missing studs when you're going to nail things in, and so making sure that it's square is very important. I'll give you yet another example of why it's important to be square. If you've ever done any remodeling work and you've had to, let's say, tear out a door and install a pre-hung door, if that opening is not square, or plumb for that matter, but let's talk about square for right now. If that opening is not square, your door and your window rough openings are not square, it's more difficult to get that door in. Sometimes if it's like this, you're going to have to use more shims on the bottom than on the top, and you're going to have to spend a lot of time messing around with a level and to get everything all squared up and plumb. And so it just is a good habit to get into, to check for square and make sure that the cabinets are square before you attach anything to them, like the backs or the face frames, for example. All right, that's probably enough of the lecture. Let's talk a little bit about what square means first, just to make sure if you're a novice to woodworking and you're a novice to cabinet building, this is really for you. When something is square, like a box or a rectangle or a square, when they mention or say that the thing is square, the first thing it really means is that all four of these corners are exactly 90 degrees. And once that happens, that is a geometrical attribute, if you will, of a squared up cabinet. And so you could theoretically take a device like this. This is just a piece of, I think it's 3/16 inch aluminum, and it was fabricated to be perfectly 90 degrees. So I could take 3 or 4 of these things, shove them in each of these corners, and clamp the heck out of them until I force these to be all 90 degrees. But that becomes, more difficult, and then you've got clamps all over the thing, and it takes too much time, and it's bulky to try to work with. So one of the other properties of a perfectly square rectangle is that the diagonals are exactly equal in their measurement. So the diagonal from this top corner to this lower corner, and over here at this top corner to this lower corner, if those two diagonals are exactly equal, then I know the box is square, and I automatically then will know that all 4 corners are 90 degrees. So I'm kind of taking a quick shortcut. And so if you've seen any videos, or you've got even a modicum of carpentry experience or cabinet building, you already kind of know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to show you 2 or 3 different ways here of how to square up a cabinet. And in fact, you can see already that this cabinet, if I set this square on it, which is also perfectly 90 degrees here, if I set that on it and it wiggles like this, as a matter of fact, if it wiggles with the outside having a gap here down the row, then I know that it's actually an acute angle and it would be smaller than 90 degrees. And similarly, if it's on this one and it's touching at the ends but it's not touching in the middle, then I know that this is actually an obtuse angle and would be greater than 90 degrees. Probably more information than you know or care, but just so you know, you can definitely see by putting this square on it, the fact that there's a big gap down here tells me that this is not in square, not squared up properly. So, saying that, we already know kind of here that the diagonals being equal, so let's talk about that. When you try to make the diagonals equal, there's a few different ways to do that. One of the more common ones that you'll see is basically applying a clamp to the longer dimension diagonal corners. And that's how you really want, that's the first method I'm going to show you. You should know it just in case. If you're doing this professionally or you want to get into this professionally, you should absolutely know this trick. But basically, when something is out of square, you're going to want to squeeze down the longer diagonal to bring it into square, and the way you do that is with a clamp. So let's take a quick measurement, because I already said if the diagonals are equal, we're already in square and we don't have to do anything. So this side is 34.5, and this diagonal is 34. So I know that these 2 corners, this constitutes the longer diagonal, so all I would go do is stick a clamp on there and tighten it down to squeeze the longer diagonal to bring the thing into square. But we want to kind of, if we're going to do this method, then we're going to really want to know what the measurement should be ahead of time so we know how much clamping pressure to put on. And there, you can apply Pythagorean's theorem, and you can do a squared plus b squared equals c squared to get what this diagonal should be, knowing what the distance here is, the length of this side and the length of this side. But that's probably too much math to sit there and try to think of that for each cabinet that you want to square up. So the easier way, if you're going to do it with this method, is basically to just take the average of the two diagonal measurements. So if this one is 34.5 and this one was 34, the average is 34.25. So once I squeeze this long diagonal side down, or corners down in, as soon as the other side registers 34.25, then I know that they're both 34.25, and I know that the cabinet is perfectly square. So the way you implement this method is you basically just take your tape measure, and I'm looking at 34 now, and I'm just going to tighten down this pipe clamp until it reads 34.25. And there, it just read 34.25. So now I know that this cabinet is perfectly in square, and then I can try to do something with it. The one problem with this clamping method is you really have to, in order to work effectively, you really have to do it upside down, which means you're going to have to beef up one of the other corners or two so it's not wobbling. To try to do this and tip it over, or if you're going to try to do it with a clamp on top, you know, this is not a great, I mean, if I can pull it off with my hands, it's not really a great friction fit. And you can't, in order for clamps to be a good friction fit, you got to really crank down to tighten it, and you can't do it, otherwise you'll throw it out a square the other way. So you could try to lift this up a little bit and keep it off and hope that it stays, or if if you're going to move it or turn it, it's going to tip, and it's just kind of an awkward thing to try to then slip a back piece over and underneath under the clamp like that and get it lifted up. It's just a lot to take into account, and really we're trying to do things as easy as possible here. But you should know this method because it could come in handy. And again, just to recap, you're going to put a pipe clamp or some kind of clamp on the diagonals, on the corners of the diagonal that's the longer one, and you're going to crank down until you get the other side to be equal to the average of the two lengths. Another reason that this tends to be a little bit impractical is it works great for small cabinets, but if you've got a bookcase or a giant carcass that's going to be like 6.5 feet by 3 feet or something like that, you're going to have to get a really, really long pipe for the pipe clamp. And most of us just don't have 50,000 clamps or really, really long clamps, and you don't want to go out and buy a whole pipe clamp setup or something like that to just for the one bookcase that you're making. Unless you're making 1,000 of them, then it's probably a good idea. But in any case, so you should just be aware of this method and how it works, and there's some pros and cons to doing it each way. The pro is it's very simple, the math is very simple, and the con is just being able to work with it. The second method, which I'm not going to show you, but I am going to talk just for a second about. The second method is actually, to square up this cabinet, is actually a method that we used in our kitchen cabinet video series, though I did not specifically call it out. If I take the inside measurement here at 15 inches here, and this one is 28.5, if I cut a piece of plywood for my back for my cabinet, and I know that I'm going to recess the back of the cabinet down into the sides of the cabinet before just like we did for our kitchen cabinet series. If you haven't seen those, go back and watch a couple of them, and you'll get the idea of how we did that. We recessed the back. If I cut the back piece of plywood exactly 15 by 28.5, and I recess it in there, as soon as I force it to be in there, it's going to automatically square up the cabinet. And that's why I didn't spend a lot of time. I checked for square periodically throughout the process, but I didn't call a lot of attention to it because of the way I cut the backs. I have the table saw, I had a 90-degree jig. I made sure absolutely that we were square when we cut the backs of those cabinets. So if the piece of wood that you're inserting here is exactly these interior dimensions and the piece of wood is square, you're going to automatically force the cabinet into square that way. And so that's one way that you can actually do it. I'm not going to show you that way because I don't have the piece cut, but just be aware of that's a second way that you can bring a cabinet into square, is just by cutting a square or a rectangle, the exact interior of the size of the dimensions, and then fitting it in there. The third way that I'm going to give you is actually involves no math whatsoever, for those of you who are math averse. And the way I do that is by creating 2 of these 90-degree jigs. And if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I am all about the jigs. When I can create them, I do it. And I'm especially excited about jigs that serve more than one purpose. And this jig can also actually be used, for example, if you are applying trim work or casework to a door or a window, and you want to take 2 pieces of trim and slide one in this way and one in this way with your miter here, and then you can actually take a pinner or a nail gun and nail into this, so that you can actually build a door casing frame or a window casing frame, outside or somewhere else, and then bring it in and apply it and attach it to the house in one piece. And sometimes that's easier than working with 3 pieces. So I've used the jigs like this before to do that, and I've used them before to square up cabinets, and I'm going to show you how to do that next. These things, by the way, are really easy to make. You just take a couple of scrap pieces of 2x4 and you screw them down to a 3/4 inch piece of plywood, and you really need 2 of them for the way I'm going to show you. But like I said, they serve more than one purpose, and they're really great. So you do it just by creating. You just use your square, like a 90-degree square here, and you just screw one of them to here, and then make sure that the other one is square, and then screw it down. So the way this method works here, again, I'm going to be squeezing the longer diagonal, so you at least have to determine which one the longer diagonal is. And what I'm going to do, this works great for like bookcases, by the way, is I'm going to place one of the corners of the longer diagonal into this one, and then I'm going to place the other one into this one. And I'm going to move it such that this thing is pretty close to the edge of the table so that I can get the clamp on it. I'm going to take one clamp here, and I'm going to clamp this guy to the table so that he won't move. And then all I'm going to do, you can see how it's not square. It behaves just like I showed you with this one. This thing wobbles pretty well in here. But all I'm going to do, and since these are not really designed to be one-handed clamps, you have to kind of set them with your second hand, I'm going to kind of get this thing ready to clamp, and I'm going to put a little bit of partial pressure, and then all I'm going to do is push this until 2 things happen. I'm flush on this side and flush on this side. And by putting that pressure and making sure I have no gaps along this edge between the cabinet wall and this 2x4, and no gaps along this edge between the cabinet wall and the 2x4, I know that I'm going to automatically be the same on the other side. And all I need to do is push it into place, push the whole thing into place here, and then just clamp it down. And now it's not going to go anywhere. I can tell you that it's 34 1/4 exactly, and I'll just check the other one so I don't make a liar out of myself. That's also 34 1/4. So now the cabinet is square, and I have open access to it in order to set down my face frame or install or apply a back that I don't want recessed, that I just want it to sit on the back edges here. So those are 3 methods that you can use. They're all very useful. I've had to use clamps to get things to square up, and knowing it's much easier to know ahead of time what the measurement needs to be, and you always know that you can squeeze in that longer diagonal. So there's a couple of methods there for you to use and to try, and always try to make sure that the things that you build are square first before trying to apply other things to them, because it just makes it more difficult to manage downstream. I hope that's been helpful. Of course, I can never make a short video. There's just so much to talk about, I think, and so many different ideas. If you've got your own idea for making things square, or if you've created jigs to do the same kind of thing and you have a cool way to do that, please share it on our Facebook page. I had a video. I started a Facebook page, facebook.com/DIY homebuilt. And you can share your pictures or your comments there, or on these videos as well. Any of those places are really, really great. So hope it's been helpful, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.